Hey, welcome back to the Advisors Compass podcast. I'm Chuck Downs. I'm here with Andy Schwartz. And for those of you that don't know Andy, Andy is about a 40-year veteran as a financial advisor, manages $2.5 billion, all organic growth, no acquisitions on that. And he runs that with a team of only 8 people, and they do an amazing job. And Andy is the CEO of a firm, One Point Wealth, and they collectively manage right at 18 billion, and that's only 55 advisors. So Andy knows what he's talking about here in the world of financial advising. So I'm glad to be here with you, Andy. And each month we sit down to have the real conversations that advisors are having about growth and scale and clarity. So if you're an advisor and you're ready to grow faster, you're ready to scale smarter, and you want to build what lasts, then you're in the right place. Andy, good to see you.
You too, Chuck. How are you?
I'm doing well. Well. You know, Andy, most advisors, they genuinely care about their clients, and yet there are important conversations that they avoid. Conversations around succession, family dynamics, spending, difficult truths. And I don't think it's because, I know it's not because they don't care. So what do you think is actually going on with why advisors are not having the difficult conversations they need to?
I think there's a couple of things to think about first, to tee that up. So why are we not having difficult conversations? What might seem to be confrontational, with a client or with a team member or employee or partner. The first thing to think about is if you are the advisor, then that means someone else isn't. So there's nobody else to engage and ask the right questions and really challenge the client about some of the decisions that they are thinking about making or are currently making. Honest conflict is way more valuable than dishonest harmony. So part of the problem I think that we all have is that, listen, we're all salespeople at heart, or we wouldn't have been able to build a successful business. And that doesn't mean we're not smart, but we are people. And I think a good salesperson is typically someone that likes to please people. So I think we are pleasers. I know me, I kill myself to serve my clients. Yesterday my project was trying to get some hard to get tickets for a client who really wanted them. And I so, badly want to help them, so I'll do anything, to help our clients. But I think part of what we have to be willing to do, though, is we have to be willing to have honest discourse with our clients. I like to say to clients that if I only agree with you, then really what purpose do I serve? And that doesn't mean I want to be disagreeable. I don't want people to say, oh my God, I hate talking to that guy. He's argumentative. Because it's not about being argumentative. But what it's about is, like people like to say that, you want to have an adult voice in the room. There's lots of reasons why people make bad decisions. A lot of times it's emotional. A lot of times they're running away from something. A lot of times that their judgment, they're in a bad place, and they're not making a sound decision. We have to be willing to step into that and help them, when those situations arise.
Yeah. How much of an advisor's avoidance do you think might actually just be projection? In other words, they're assuming that the client doesn't want to go there, but maybe the advisors is actually the one that doesn't have the courage to go there. How much of that do you think happens?
I'm sure it's a lot. Again, we come from a place where we want to be loved. We want to be their friend. We want them to like us. We don't want to be disagreeable. So I think some of that, and then some of it too. And what we have to be really careful is that, so I'm married to a coach, and obviously Chuck, you're a coach. I think the big misconception about coaching is that people think that coaches tell you what to do, but coaches don't really tell you what to do. Coaches are supposed to ask really good questions because people know what they should do, right? I think deep down inside, everybody knows the answer, but the problem is that, you just got to get the answer out. And so, I think and so the problem is we all come to these conversations with our own perceptions, everyone's projecting, no matter what it is. Kid issues, if I've got a kid problem, that I'm coming to this conversation about children with my own kid problem. If I have a marriage problem and a client is having a marriage problem, I come to that conversation with my own problem. And that's kind of how the world works. One of the things I think is really important is we have to separate ourselves, from that. We cannot come to conversations if we're going to help clients with our own baggage. We have to be like a clean slate. We have to listen to these people and not project because their problem might not be our problem. Their issue isn't our issue. So we have to really listen to what the issues are. And then we have to be able to just make honest, and I don't even want to say conclusions, maybe ask honest questions and then give honest feedback. And and there's lots of things we could talk about in this area, whether they want to start a business, whether they are having it's a marital question. And unfortunately, we deal with divorce quite a bit, in our business. All of us as advisors do. And that's always a very uncomfortable place for us to be because we're in between and we don't want to be in between, and we don't want to be in the middle of what is messy and sometimes really emotionally, just charged and unpleasant. But again, we can be very helpful, in these situations with their children, situations with, maybe giving their children more than they should be giving their children because they're not helping their children. But again, we have to go to those conversations in an honest way, not carrying our own, certain beliefs or our own, certain, baggage, that we bring to a conversation.
When I hear you say we got to go there in an honest way, what I think is authenticity. And if you look at sales training, traditional sales training, and a lot of the high level sales training, it teaches um, how to build rapport and how to mirror people and how to subconsciously get people to like us.
Right.
And so the whole foundation of that is really built upon inauthenticity. In other words, it's built on, change who you really are, how you show up, how you speak, the speed, all this stuff, right? To a
Almost manipulation, right? In a way, kind of,
It's, for
you know,
years, and listen, in all honesty, I've said that the difference between manipulation and influence is intent. And so if your intention is to manipulate someone for not for their greater good, then that's manipulation. If you influence someone for their greater good, that's influence. So it, and as we're having this conversation, I just think, I mean, we have programmed ourselves as salespeople to a very certain extent to not be authentic, and so we're kind of starting many relationships, wanting to influence people, but not being our authentic self when we're doing it.
yeah, yeah,
So it's I think there's a lot to dive into there. We maybe in a different discussion, but let me ask you this: what would you say? What's the cost, the relationship cost,
yeah,
when a client senses that their advisor is avoiding something or steering around something?
yeah. Look, I think that asset allocations, performance, setting up, accounts in proper places, you know, tax, all that stuff is kind of table stakes today. There's no differentiating factor. I think what people want and the reason people stay with an advisor is because it is a trusted person. It is someone that they can talk to about things that maybe they can't talk to other people about. When you think about if you're fabulously successful, and you make way more money or you have way more assets than a lot of the people that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, you cannot talk about those things with those people. You can't ask questions. If you're someone that makes lots and lots of money, you can't talk to your friends about, you're thinking about, you can't decide whether it's NetJets or FlexJet, and you're having this conversation about, what does that really cost and how does it really work? Because people look like, first of all, what are you talking about? And second of all, oh my God, that's ridiculous, right? Because that's not so. To be, I think, a great advisor and to be someone that maintains long-term relationships with very, very successful clients is you have to be that sort of trusted confidant. You have to be someone, that honors confidentiality, obviously. But you have to be honest, you know, because think about your most successful clients. I mean, and look, I'm my second biggest client. I mean, the problem I have sometimes is, I have 250 employees and they're all awesome and we have a great team. But I want honest feedback. I want somebody to tell me, hey, dude, you're like way off base here. That's a really dumb idea because, I want that. I don't want people just always going along, telling me how smart I am or, that what I'm suggesting is a good idea because they're afraid. It's the same with our clients. And those clients are getting that with the rest of the world because they have employees and, they're running businesses and they're super successful people and nobody really challenges them. And so, they need someone in their life that will actually ask the question like, why are you doing that? Like, does that really make sense? Or asking them other questions. Have they thought about certain things as they, enter into these ideas, these things that they want to do? And that is valuable. And that's way more valuable than 1 or 200 basis points plus or minus the S&P. It's really, really valuable. And I think that what we have to realize is we've been doing this for more than 10 or 15 years is you come to these conversations with tremendous experience and you watch lots of people make lots of mistakes. It doesn't help you as an advisor, and it certainly doesn't help your clients that as you're witnessing these mistakes, if you're not learning something from it. And sometimes they're mistakes that we make. I mean, look, my biggest, growth opportunities, my biggest, I think, wealth of information or knowledge or help to my clients sometimes comes from other clients' mistakes. Sometimes it comes from my own mistakes, where I made a mistake, I internalize it, I evaluate it, I break it down. I say, okay, this is where, when I came to that fork in the road, and when I went left, I should have gone right. This is where it is. And then I can share that. And I don't necessarily share my own. I don't tell them where it's coming from, but I can share the advice. I can share what questions I should have asked myself and I didn't. What's the downside to that situation? So we like to talk about tail risk. What's the tail risk in these decisions? Because we want to make sure that the downside tail risk isn't greater than the upside opportunity. And so we want to, and also rational. It isn't emotional. It's not an opinion. It doesn't have anything to do with our own personal beliefs. It isn't. It's just facts. It's just what's positive about a decision and what's negative about a decision. And where could this go wrong? And I'm not saying it will go wrong, but where could it go wrong? And just let's make sure we're game planning, not because people are always so excited about a new idea, and we can talk about, people come to us all the time. They want to start a business, and that's always a conversation.
Let's jump over there. You mentioned you mentioned dumb ideas, and so sometimes you've got the vantage point, and maybe immediately it's like this is a dumb idea, and maybe it's not a dumb idea, but it's a risky idea. Tell us, just anything that you can as far as like maybe a situation that how you actually walk the client through recognizing that maybe this is a dumb idea or just too risky.
This is a good moment to pause and share something that we've been building. It's called the Playbook for Wealth Advisors. If you've built a successful practice, but you still feel like too much runs through you, then this is for you. The Playbook is the framework behind many of the conversations we have on this podcast: how to think like an owner, create real leverage, and grow without sacrificing your time, energy, or relationships. Most advisors don't need more ideas. They need a clear way to structure what they already know. And that's what the Playbook provides. You can learn more at epicsuccess.com/playbook. Let's get back to the conversation.
So the first thing to remember is every idea that gets funded, every business that starts, and I don't know how many businesses get started in America every year. Is it 1 million? I mean, literally. I mean, we're all having these conversations every day and everybody's pitching ideas, especially to us, because they think somehow we're going to help them raise money, which we're not. But, everyone wants you to know. But your clients will always come to you with ideas. The first question is, why are they going to this place? Are they running away from something or are they running towards something? So the first thing I want to try to talk to a client about is, are you doing this business because you hate your job? And basically you're going to buy a job, or are you doing this business because maybe you can't find a job? Or are we doing this business, maybe we're going to start a business for our kids because we feel like they can't find a job? I think it's a very bad idea to start a business because you're running away from something or because you can't do something somewhere else. That's not a great reason. The other thing I talk to clients about is that every business, I mean, they're all good ideas, right? Because if they weren't good ideas, they wouldn't be funded. At least they're good ideas in someone's mind. It's like every time I walk by, and I'm obsessed with this. I'm walking through town, and another store opens up. Oh, they sell like tea, like literally, they sell 500 assortments of tea in a little town. I'm like, well, that's a great idea. I'm sure that I wonder how long that lease is, because either they'll go bankrupt or maybe it'll only be a year. But and it's like, what are people thinking? But and who knows where that came from. So what we have to talk to clients about is there's 3 reasons why businesses don't work. And it's a lot of times it's not because it was a bad idea or it was a bad business. I mean, it could be a bad idea, and that's obviously a killer. It's execution and it's capital, running out of capital. So you can have a very good idea for a business. If you don't execute properly, if you're not the right people, it doesn't work. But even if you execute, good idea, good business, execution's really good, but ultimately what ends up happening is people run out of capital. And that's where 90% of these businesses fail. And so I talk to clients about, where is the capital going to come from? When you expand and it actually is working, forget about, just getting off the ground, that it's actually working. Where does that capital come from? Because time and time again, we see it. People run out of money and then the businesses fail ultimately. And so we have to have that conversation. And again, why are you doing this? I was talking to a client the other day and they had a real estate idea. Why are you doing this? Are you looking for an activity? Are you bored? Do you feel like you need to do something to make yourself feel like you're being productive? Or is it a really good financial decision? Because you got to figure that out first. If this is about a financial decision and nothing else, just a good financial decision, a good investment decision, then we have to start talking about what can go right and what can go wrong. Those are the conversations we have. And I would say, and look, sometimes the clients, if you know that they're really stuck on it and they're doing this, then I've said my piece, and then I root for success, because I don't want to be the guy that's rooting against my clients. And I would never say I told you so. But at the end of the day, if somebody comes to you and they say, hey, I've got this idea and I'm going to do this. And if the hair on the back of your neck is kind of standing up and you're like, oh boy, this sounds like a really bad idea, and you don't say anything because you don't want to hurt their feelings, or you don't want to be the guy that's being Mr. Negative, then, what's going to happen, if that business fails, I'm not going to say it's your fault, but you could have been helpful there. And what good are you as an advisor if you can't give honest advice, to clients? So and the thing I welcome is when I get the call, because I think they know I have an opinion and they trust me. So I get the call before, not after. And that doesn't mean that I talk everybody out of everything, because I don't. But we're going to have the conversation and we're going to think it through. We're not just going to make an emotional decision that we might regret in the future.
To have that conversation, one of the things that advisors have to have is internal fortitude. They've got to, there's certainly a certain level of confidence that an advisor has to have. I know a lot of people today, maybe for a long time, have lived with this imposter syndrome. So that's one of the things that advisors have to get through and get over in order to stand there and authentically share with clients. Because if an advisor is worried about losing this client because I'm pushing them, that's a bad space to be in, right?
No doubt. And again, you got to be really careful. You can't be a know-it-all. It's not about being a know-it-all. I don't want, the lawyers are the know-it-alls, right? And we all have those conversations, and I find it so annoying. They don't listen. So the first thing we want to do is we want to ask questions. We don't want to be talking at our clients. We want to ask questions. We want to understand why. Why are we doing this? What is the potential? Have we thought about the downside risk? What's the up? What's the down? We want to ask all those questions. We want to understand, not, just dismissing, an idea, because that's a really bad place to be. And that's a really bad way to, I think, it's not a good foundation for a relationship. So we want to ask a lot of questions, and then and we just, we don't come to it with a bias. And some ideas are good ideas, but we do come to this with experience, and we have watched. And if you're newer in this business and you don't have experience, then get some advice from people that do have experience. And maybe it's not a bad thing to bring somebody in on a conversation. If a client's asking you, instead of like, "Oh, that sounds awesome, Chuck. You guys you're gonna do Slurpees." I mean, I think they do that at 7-Eleven, but okay, yeah, Slurpees sounds great. And you can deliver them to the house. Yeah, it sounds like a big winner to me. And yeah, if I could invest in, I would, but I'm not allowed to because of regulatory requirements. Um, but get some help. Help them dig in. Whether it's a CPA you trust, or another advisor that you trust. But if they're asking, that's really where we build really deep relationships. When people are making life decisions and they come to you and they're asking for your opinion, and to just dismiss it as, "Hey, that's a great idea. I'm Switzerland. I'm going to be neutral because that way nobody can ever be mad at me." I don't think that's a great way to build a deep relationship with a client and to build real trust long term as a trusted confidant, because that's really what we want to be. We want to be a trusted confidant.
What strikes me about that is, I heard you say, "Hey, don't be the know-it-all." Really come to the table inquisitive, asking questions with a degree of humility and searching, wanting to serve. The other thing that hits me there is there are going to be some clients. Most advisors, especially starting out, they're going to have that advisor that the or rather the client, that the client is the know-it-all.
Yeah.
They know everything and they don't want feedback. And I think advisors have to be willing that if you've got one of those clients, you're probably just renting that relationship, right? And this
Yeah. I
is a
mean,
good
there's no
way
doubt. Yeah. Yeah. Because I
great
mean,
way to get rid of them.
yeah, I mean, there's no doubt if they're really not interested in your opinion about serious financial issues, then you're not really their advisor. You're their broker. You might be where they house their assets, for as long as your performance is okay. And that's always a difficult place to be. But that's not the relationship I want. But again, you've got to be very mindful that these ideas that these people have, these are, sometimes they walk around with these ideas for a long time. And you talk about dreams and aspirations, and a lot of times it's not about the business itself. It's about the aspiration of being their own boss. It's the aspiration of making more money. It's the aspiration of being successful. So they have this aspiration. The question is, does the business match the aspiration? And so what I want to do is I don't want to kill their aspirations. I don't want to kill their dreams. Look, just come to me all the time and they say, "I'm going to do this and this." I never, ever am the guy that says you can't do that. Guy's been in the business for 15 years and he's got 200 million. And I have this conversation all the time. And in 5 years, you're going to be at 1 billion. Now, I'm not going to tell someone that they can't do that, because I truly believe that people are capable of almost anything, that they believe they can do. But, the idea is, we set goals. Just because you set a goal, though, that's not what it's about. You have to have goals. What it's about is having a process, right? Systems. How am I going to achieve that goal? So I don't want to be the guy that crushes anybody's dreams. And dreams are great, but I have these conversations really all the time, with clients, and sometimes, we agree to disagree, but if you get a really bad outcome, 4 years from now, and you didn't say anything. Now again, I've had a few of these, and I did say, and I did question, and I got overruled. You don't understand. This is a gigantic opportunity. In the back of your mind, you're like, I don't want to be the guy that talks somebody out of doing something that could be fantastic. That great investment that they're just be $100 million. I don't want to be the guy to tell them not to do it. But so oftentimes, though, those things turn out to be disasters. And you just want to make sure that you engage in the conversation at the time. And you don't have to feel bad about it.
Yeah. Yeah. What what does a client feel when an advisor actually goes there and has that difficult conversation? What changes in that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a trust, I think, that's established. I think that if you want to be the trusted advisor, you have to be willing to engage like a trusted advisor, and be willing to take the risk. And I think people, they're not necessarily going to agree with you, but I think they really appreciate someone challenging the thinking. That's what everybody should want. If I'm going to make a major investment and start a business, what I should want is for people to be asking me all the questions that I didn't think about. Like people should be saying, okay, what is it that I'm not asking? What is it that I'm not thinking about? What's around the corner that I don't expect? Help me. Because I don't want to make a bad decision. I want to make this decision, but I don't want to make a bad decision. And so we've got to be willing to help them with that, and a lot of it is just asking questions. We have, I mean, I have the benefit again of making a lot of really stupid decisions over 42 years. So I've had a lot of time to do that and plenty of resources to do that. So that's been great. I've been able to lose money in lots of different ways. But more, I've been able to watch lots and lots of clients do lots and lots of things. And every now and then it works out. And more of it is like these kind of bad investment ideas. They're making investments with friends, with family, with their kids. And it's like, you can just see it, you just know it's not a good idea. And you have to ask the questions. You have to challenge them. And a lot of times, I'll get a phone call, a week later and say, hey, I really appreciate the conversation. I decided not to do that. And I feel, I wasn't feeling comfortable about it. I wasn't feeling, and I feel much better now that I've kind of let that go. And so there's value there. And that's a relationship that is a real relationship for me. That's someone that believes they have a trusted advisor that they can talk to things about that they can't talk to other people about.
What would you say are the beliefs that the best advisors that are having these difficult conversations, what are a couple of the beliefs that you have and that you've seen other advisors have that are important to have in order to have these types of difficult conversations?
The first is we have to go into the conversation with the idea that we're just trying to help these people. We're not going to this conversation with our own, I don't know if belief is the right word, opinion, how things should be. This isn't a political conversation. It's not, this is the way it's supposed to be because I know this is the way it's supposed to be. And this is the only way you can do things. You have to go to the conversation really wanting to help people make the best decision. And that decision could be that they do whatever it is they want to do. Again, we're not in the business of talking people out of things. We're in the business of making sure that they are looking at something in a rational way, that we're asking all the right questions. We're going with our eyes wide open and we're not going to make a big mistake. And that could be an investment, that could be a business, that could be a real estate transaction, that could be lots of things. And we're not doing things for the wrong reason. But don't go in there with your own preconceived notion or opinion. We're just there to help them. That's all. And we don't know everything. And if we don't, if there's things we need to get help with, we need to be able to get help. Whether that's legal help or whether that's, financial help, accounting help, whatever it is, opinions, so that we can help people make the right decisions. But I think it's really important to go into any of these conversations without your own bias. And, I mean, we talk a lot about, people that get divorced, and one of the things I always say to clients is, listen, we're fighting over, when you really think about this, and maybe it's different in every state, but at the end of the day, what we're typically fighting over is 10%. And the question I always ask is it really worth blowing up your world, her world, your kids' world, your future happiness, everyone's future happiness for 10%? And I would argue it is not. And then if they don't understand what I'm saying to them, then I try to break that down. And I do have some experience with this personally, and I've seen it, so many times. And so, and I think that, it's difficult, when you're having conversations like that, because people, depending on what's happening, it's very emotionally charged. People get angry, they're emotional. But at the end of the day, and you have to pick your spots. There's times to have these conversations, there's times not to. And if people are in a really bad emotional state, then maybe you pick your spot. And that might be one you call back in 3 or 4 days. But at the end of the day, I think it's really helpful to sort of frame out, because, in that situation, I mean, and I don't want to say all lawyers, because I happen to have a matrimonial family law guy that I think is a good guy. Like, he tries to get resolution and not blow everybody's world up, but a lot of them are not. And having someone that is not interested and creating a big fight, but someone that someone trusts to say, listen, I get everybody's mad about something, and there's always, unfortunately, it's never quite equal, right? The pain's never equal, or the hurt's never equal. It's always a different kind of situation. But at the end of the day, it becomes a financial transaction, at least as far as we're concerned. And that financial transaction, we're fighting over 10%. I want to be at my daughter's wedding, and I want to be able to sit at the table with my first wife, and be really, really good friends. And if I can do that, what is that worth? And that's how I approach that, and I think, people need help with that, not egging people on like, yeah, you know what, you're right. You made all the money. Why should she get whatever? Why should he get whatever? And yeah, I just, so, if you can help people, frame out what do these decisions look like after? Forgetting about just the financial, but what does your life look like after? What does your family look like after? What does, what does it look like when you're at the hospital and your grandchildren are born? Is it you could show up at 9 o'clock because you can't see the other person at 11 o'clock? Like, I don't know what that is worth or what it's worth not to have that, but to me, it's a lot. And so again, we try with experience and things we've seen to help people at least think about it, you know, ask the questions. What do you want things to look like? What are we really fighting over? I mean, we're probably hurt or angry or upset, but what are we really fighting over? And so if you can help them do that, I think that's valuable, so just another, one of those conversations that unfortunately we have, fairly often.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one, and, I'm sure you have, I mean, fighting over the 10%, I mean, that ends a lot of fights, I'm sure,
Yeah.
or avoids a lot, slows them
Yeah.
down, so that's good. What conversations do you think that advisors avoid most often that clients usually would appreciate the most?
I think probably the most sensitive subject when you're talking to clients is kids, their children. And what we find is, look, if you're really super rich, other than maybe you're creating interdependence, or you're not creating a good environment or a good situation for them to be, dependent on you, and it's better to let these kids grow up and be self-reliant. I always say I want my kids to come to Thanksgiving because they want to see their dad, not because they're on my payroll. You know, but there's different levels of wealth for clients, and I've got clients that are really uber rich. What difference does it make? They're going to give the kids money later, so whatever. Let's give them the money now, and as long as they're at an age where at least they're developed as human beings, it's fine. But I've got lots of clients that are really enabling, their adult children, and maybe to their own detriment, and that's a really difficult conversation because I'm like, Chuck, listen, I'm worried about you having enough money if you live to be 100, or your wife, and, your children are making financial decisions that they really don't have the wherewithal to execute. And they're asking you to help them. And look, help them if it's something that they need, not want, then by all means. We help them with whatever things they need. And need is shelter and it's support, but additions, swimming pools in the backyard, a bigger house, those are wants. Those aren't necessarily needs. And if they can do that for themselves, God bless them. That's I'll cheer for them. And but not at the detriment of your future financial security. And that is a very difficult conversation because nobody wants, whatever has happened in the last 20 years, nobody wants to say no to their children. You know, what schools, they're sending their kids to. We have the conversation. Again, you got to tread lightly, but at the end of the day, it is okay to ask the question. $100,000 a year, which by the way, you don't really have, or, it's not like it's just laying around, compared to $25,000 a year, where the outcome's probably no different. Has anyone at least thought about that? Or maybe graduate school might be the place to spend that money if there's going to be graduate school. Has anybody really thought about that? And I even talk to clients like when they have 15-year-olds, and I say, listen, I'm going to give you some advice. You probably won't take it, but you might want to start having the conversation now, because the problem is when they're in 8th grade and 9th grade and 10th grade, the conversation, oh, you can go anywhere you want, honey. You just study hard and get really good grades, right? And that's doesn't matter. And then they get there. Well, if you do that, and then the kid's like a sophomore in high school, and and they're wearing Georgia, whatever that color is, and they're wearing, Auburn, blue, or they're wearing Alabama red, and well, if you're in New Jersey, you go to University of Alabama, that probably costs like $75,000 a year, when, Rutgers University is probably 30, plus all the different incidentals. And look, if you're uber rich, it doesn't matter. But if it's the average client that you and I deal with, that's probably not a great financial decision. And by the way, when they get out of college, there's a very good possibility they might live with you for a while. And then they're going to need some help getting into some kind of housing, even if they're just renting. And they're going to need a car. And there's lots of things that have to happen. So I'm not telling you where your kids should go to school, but I just hope that somebody's at least thinking this through, and that we don't have 16-year-olds making financial decisions for the family, because that's what's happening. And again, if they're really rich, who cares? It's like a source of pride. It's like people are concerned about what bumper sticker is on their car. People always say, oh, your daughter went to Michigan. No. My daughter went to Michigan State. My kids aren't that smart. And it was a lot cheaper, So, I mean, it isn't a vanity thing for me, if my kid went to Harvard doesn't make me smarter or dumber, it just means my kid was smart, and I think that we've all kind of gotten sucked into some of these things. And again, you don't have to have the conversation, you could say, awesome, but again, if you're talking to clients and they have 14 and 15-year-olds, not a bad thing to say, just to be aware, because you're going to create this. Right? Because we don't want to say no to them later. Well, if you set boundaries when they're in ninth grade and the kids go to school and say, yeah, well, I'm going to go somewhere local. I'm going to go to you can go to any New Jersey state school you want to go to. So you better study really hard, because Rowan University is getting really hard to get into, and so is Rutgers. You can frame that, or you can say, oh yeah, you can go anywhere you want. So the kid's going to California, they're going to USC. It's $110,000 a year. It costs you another $10,000 for $15,000 your incidentals. And it's a real pain in the ass too, quite frankly, because you're going to move that shit all across the country. And you created that because when they were in ninth grade, when they were 14 years old, you decided that they were going to be making financial decisions that had really long-term implications for the family. Probably not a great idea. But again, just, not going to argue about it or fight about it, but it's an opinion. And if nothing else, people respect the idea. At least you think financially, because you are a financial advisor. And I know plenty of financial advisors that, aren't necessarily in very good financial shape. So, but just conversation.
Those are real conversations. Those are important conversations. I mean, that I can see where that will save. I mean, that could be the difference between someone retiring on time and pushing it off 10 years or maybe never, right? I mean, it
could be the difference between being able to help the kids with a down payment on a house or not being able to help them. Because if you save $50,000 a year over 4 years, that's $200,000. Now, in most parts of the country, you don't even need $200,000 for a down payment. You can do it with less. The kids today, it's very difficult to buy a house because of that down payment. And so, I don't want to say it's out of vanity, because I think all parents love their children and they want to do what's best for their kids. I'm just not sure it's very well thought out. And maybe having these conversations, especially, look, if you're a younger advisor and you're 40 and you're talking to people and their kids are younger, these are interesting conversations to have. They might welcome the conversation because they're all competing against their neighbors for their kids to be the best soccer player, the best lacrosse player, the best baseball player, and they want to go to the best schools because somehow that's a reflection on them. And you might help them by saying, listen, this is how this plays out. And this is the decisions that we have to make someday. And this is the difference in some of those decisions and the difference it can make in your life and theirs. And I think if nothing else, it's like, wow, I get it. I'm not going to listen, but it is a thoughtful, smart conversation.
I mean, I'm thinking that prevents the kid from going to all their friends saying, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there. And then the kids got to dig their heels in more and push the parent. I want to go here. By having that conversation early on, it's saving not only money, it's saving its family dynamics in a big way.
Well, you set the expectation. Life's all about expectations. If the 12-year-old, expectation is that they can go to any state school or any school that they can get, some kind of financial aid. And it's not even financial aid, scholarship. So if they're really good students, I mean, I've had clients say their kid got into Notre Dame on basically like almost a full ride, but they didn't go to Notre Dame because, I don't know, another school had a better whatever. And I'm like thinking to myself, or no, it was like Notre Dame is where they went full cost, $100,000 a year, whatever it was. Great school. I mean, I've got a couple of partners went to Notre Dame, but I think they got into like another really good school, like Carnegie Mellon or something, but at a full scholarship. And they didn't go to Carnegie at a full scholarship because the kid wanted to go to another school. And if you set the expectation early, then you're not having that. You don't disappoint your children because you just basically told them up front what the deal is going to be, and they're like, okay, that's fine. This is how we look at this. But maybe you'll be the parent that can help that kid get into a house 2 or 3 years out of school, because the difference between what you spent on the tuition is a down payment on a house. And if nothing else, let's help our clients at least understand the choices they're making.
Yeah.
And this is not about our richest clients. This is about our average clients. And and my average client's probably bigger than most people listening today. This is really about your average client. And those decisions are impacting their financial future and their children's.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk to that advisor, and this will be our closing question. Talk to that advisor that's sitting here listening right now, and they know that there's conversations that they need to have, and either they weren't aware that they needed to have them, or they've just been putting them off. What would you say to that advisor for now?
Yeah, what I would say is, if there's a conversation you've been putting off, pick up the phone, schedule it or send an email, schedule an appointment, say, listen, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. And I just wanted to take 30 minutes and just have a conversation, not about your accounts, but just about things we've been talking about. And I think if nothing else, they'll really appreciate the fact that you care about them, you think about them, and you just want to make sure that you're doing the best you can to help them. And again, I never say, look, I know I'm right. I'm smarter than you, listen to me. I'm the sage. It doesn't go that way. It's just, I am concerned, and I just want to make sure that you've thought about this, this, and this. That's all. I just want to make sure, because I care about you. And obviously I care about your financial future, because that's my job. And sometimes I'll say to clients, forgive me for disagreeing, forgive me for having a different opinion about something. Because if I just go along, what value do I have? How do I serve you if I just go along just to make life easier? It doesn't, so again, not argumentative, respectful, ask questions, understand what people are doing, understand why they're doing it, and then try to help them, get to the right conclusion, whether they do what they want to do or don't do what they want to do. And either way is fine, but yeah, I think people really appreciate that conversation. So if there's someone you've been thinking about, you should call them. If there's nobody, that's fine. But then also just listen to what's going on around you. Listen to what clients are saying and ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah. This was good, Andy. You started with one of the first things you said was honest conflict is better than inauthentic harmony. I love that. I love don't fight over the 10%. I mean, that's huge. And then the idea of having these conversations with parents about college, I think that's a huge one. There were a lot of gems in here, but those were the 3 that I really took away with. So thanks for the sharing today.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always good seeing you.
Yeah. Great to see you too. And thank you for joining us on the Advisor's Compass. And look, if today's conversation gave you clarity, sparked any new ideas, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss what's next. And if this was valuable and beneficial for you, then share it with another advisor who would also benefit, because when you grow faster, you scale smarter, you build what lasts, then you create clarity every step of the way. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.
Herein referred to as 1 Point BFG. 1 Point BFG is not affiliated with Advisor Compass. Chuck Downs is not affiliated with 1 Point BFG, nor compensated by 1 Point BFG. The opinions expressed by Andy Schwartz are my own personal views and experiences as an investment advisor representative. The information contained herein is provided for informational and discussion purposes only and is not and may not be relied on in any manner as legal, tax, accounting, or regulatory advice, nor does it constitute an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities and may not be used or relied upon in connection with any offer or sale of securities. The information, as set forth herein, should not be construed or interpreted as One Point BFG's guarantee of any particular investment outcome or guarantee of future investment returns or results.